Welcome to this week's edition of A World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C., and we want to talk significantly today about Syria, what has happened in Syria in the last week is an example of the successful defense of the modern state against the subversion which is inherent in the Anglo-American or NATO drive to create microstates, mini-states, failed states, rump states, subdivision, secession. In other words, the destruction of the modern state. And to put it in the proper historical terms right at the beginning, there are two parties in the world today. You have the neo-feudalists, or just feudalists, and then you have the party which stands with the post-Westphalian state system. That is to say, at the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, the outcome of the greatest war of the past millennium in terms of proportions, the 30 Years' War in Europe, which killed between one-third and one-half of the population in Central Europe, by far eclipsing World War I, World War II, even put together. At the end of that unimaginable bloodletting, which was a war of religion, at least to a large degree, it was agreed that the future life of humanity would be organized into states, sovereign states, sometimes nation states, that the old notion of the Holy Roman Empire or other empires would have to go away, that religious authorities such as the papacy would maintain importance, but they would not be able to dominate political affairs. They would essentially be reduced or relegated to the spiritual realm, which, according to many, including Dante, was where they should have stayed in the beginning. So at Westphalia, you have the emergence of the European system of sovereign states, the European state system, and then with the growing power of Europe, the growth of imperialism after that, by the middle of the 20th century, with the collapse of the colonial empires, finally, the modern system of sovereign states has been extended to virtually the entire world. Now, there is a backlash against that. The two fronts, I guess we could call them, are the Westphalian faction and the neo-feudalists. But we can also call it the statists against the feudalists. Yeah, the statists against the feudalists. And you better decide where you stand. And of course, I hear people say, oh, statist, that's a bad word. Well, it's not a bad word. It's the word that is synonymous with civilization, because you could call it the statist or civilization faction against the feudalists, the anarchists, the anarcho-capitalists, the subdividers, the partitioners, the secessionists, and so forth. There are other choice words we could put on them. Remember that this process goes back deep into the early Italian Renaissance, right? When it was December 1310, we celebrated the arrival of Henry of Luxembourg to Milan, Italy, on the way to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor, with Dante showing up, and we said that this was the beginning of the pilot form, the precursor form of the modern state, because it was in 1310 that the Visconti dynasty was established in Milan. That's the nucleus, the embryo of the modern state. And between 1310 and 1399, approximately, the death of Gian Galeazzo Visconti, that is when you get the first model of the modern state. And that was then continued under people like Francesco Sforza. And ultimately, this is what was copied by Louis XI of France, Henry VII of England, and to some extent in Spain, although here it is somewhat more complex. All of that before 1500. So it took approximately 200 years to mature a recognizable modern state, and it took the form in England and France of the new monarchy. That is why these countries fared much better in terms of modernization than did Holy Roman Empire, Germany, Czechoslovakia, places like this, or places further east where serfdom was actually increasing in the 1600s, where elsewhere, west of the line from Trieste to Danzig or Gdansk, the serfdom was receding. And the point of that is a strong absolute monarchy in those days, not now, but those days, was actually instrumental in crushing the level of the feudal princes, who otherwise in Germany, Holy Roman Empire, ran wild. So this then became the European system in 1648, and with the breakup of the colonial empires in the 1960s into the 1970s, became the dominant form of polity in the world. Now, the dying Anglo-American empire, having been able to momentarily extend its power over the globe, it's a little bit like the British in 1919 being able to take over most of the littoral of the Indian Ocean and make the Indian Ocean into the British lake. You could say that the British reached the high point of empire in the 1920s, but of course this was the beginning of the end, because by the 1950s, the signs of the breakup of the British Empire, in particular Sudan winning their independence again in 1956, this left no doubt that empires were a dying form. So if you want to support civilization, you must now plant your flag, take up your position on the side of the Westphalian European state system, and call yourself a statist, and call your enemies feudalists and neo-feudalists. And this is a pervasive judgment, because it impacts every aspect. Now, what we've seen in Syria in the past week is a victory of the modern state over neo-feudalist tactics. Go back to Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate. That's the book I put out with some help from one or two other authors, Bruce Marshall, Jonathan Mawat, in the spring of 2008. It was put out in April, in time for the Pennsylvania primary of that year. And in there we say that the technique of the color revolution is an attempt to use modern communications media, the social media, internet, and all the rest of this, but to use it in the service of the neo-feudal cause to undermine and destroy the modern state through mass manipulation, mass brainwashing, MK, and so forth. And if you notice, if you look at the chapter in Obama, the Postmodern Coup, that talks about simply the idea that Obama is Mr. Color Revolution, he is the agent of the subversion of the modern state over vast parts of the world, the title of that is, it includes the word swarming adolescents, right? That was the Obama campaign, swarming adolescents, young fanatical dupes, carried away by the utopian and millenarian and messianic rhetoric of the Obama campaign, who then became Sturmabteilungen or Squadre, the teams to overwhelm Obama's primary opposition and then the McCain campaign. So, swarming. What has been defeated in Syria this week is swarming, as we will now detail in the next segment. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We have been talking about the Obama, the Postmodern Coup, very timely book, published in April 2008. It essentially makes it clear Obama is Mr. Color Revolution. He will try to subvert the entire world using color revolutions, and that, of course, is attempted in Iran, successfully carried out with the help, of course, of Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, the CIA limited hangout artist. With the help of Assange, it was possible to bring down the governments in Tunisia, in Egypt. Then resistance emerged in the form of Gaddafi of Libya, who held off the myrmidons of the color revolution for a good 6 months or even more. And now it has come to Syria. So go back and take a look at Obama, the postmodern coup. We're also reminding people this remains the 20th anniversary month of George H.W. Bush, the unauthorized biography. This is Bush the Elder, and this is the book that has Prescott Bush, the grandfather of the most recent president supporting Hitler. It's got George Bush as being the subject of the smoking gun tape in Watergate. It's got Bush caught lying dozens of times. It's got the Southern strategy. It's got Bush introducing eugenics, Nazi eugenics of Shockley and Bernstein and others into the U.S. Congress on the way to formalizing that under Carter, that the U.S. policy would be Malthusian. So find all those books at tarpley.net, and don't forget the Twitter feed, Webster G. Tarpley. This was a very active week, and on times like these, you've got to go to the Twitter feed at Webster G. Tarpley, and again, join in. I hear reactionaries on the radio. Hannity, for example, wants to have a Twitter army for the coming election. Well, I want a Twitter army too, and the way to do that is get yourself registered on Twitter. Get in there and fight. Go into the blood and sand of the arena. If you believe in ideas, you got to get out there and fight for them. This is not passive, consumer-oriented politics. If you don't know where to start, go to Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter. You'll find all sorts of things. You can retweet them. You can rephrase them. You can then use them to go out on your own and find new things and elaborate. You can do it any way you want to, but hopefully the general line ought to be clear that we're interested in independent Syria. We want to defeat imperialism. We want to defeat fascist austerity, and we want to make sure that all of that gets onto the social media that the imperialists are so fond of quoting. Now, the headline would be Syria defeats NATO's swarming terrorists, or another way to put it is Syria defeats, at least momentarily. Now, nothing is ultimately decided at this point, but to a significant degree, we can say Syria has rebuffed. It has withstood what was supposed to be an overwhelming assault in the last week. Now, the swarming part, this is the heart of the matter. Swarming as a military tactic. You saw swarming as a political tactic. These were Obama's youth brigades, his myrmidons, young dupes, sucked up into the hope and change rhetoric, willing to do all sorts of things on the internet, go to demonstrations, and so forth. You've seen the same thing with Ron Paul. Ron Paul is trying to swarm the Republican conventions and overwhelm them with his young dupes, and therefore get a say at the convention. Mainly, he's looking for things he can bargain away for the sake of Little Rand's career. So all of you poor dupes out there who have been working for Ron Paul, taking the pathetic bait of libertarianism, actually becoming activists for genocide against the American people, for $1 trillion in cuts, which would kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans. This is swarming from Obama to Ron Paul, but now it's tried by NATO. And some of this, we have to thank Thierry Meyssan on the job in Syria for bringing a lot of this to our attention with his reports. You can see those at the Voltaire Network website. The basic idea is that NATO decided they needed a second wave, a second attack echelon to try to overthrow Syria, to introduce chaos, confusion, the collapse of the state, coups, ethnic massacres, genocide against Assad backers, whatever they were, against Alawites, against Christians, right? If you're Greek Orthodox, if you're a Maronite from Lebanon, if you're a Melkite Catholic, that means a Roman Catholic, any kind of Christian, and I'm really wondering if you're an evangelical Christian, are you so full of contempt for your fellow Christians in Syria that you're willing to support the attack by Al Qaeda against them? I'm absolutely shocked by this prospect. So that was the goal. Now, up to now, we know they had an airlift from Libya to Iskenderun in southern Turkey. We're now getting indications they use Incirlik for the same purpose. This all well established. So a lot of the foreign crazies, the foreign fighters, the fanatics, the killers, Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, Al Qaeda of the Islamic Maghreb, Al Qaeda, Salafis, Saudis, all kinds of people like this, leftovers from the GIA in Algeria that was thoroughly defeated, and this was then shipped into the southern Turkey area, and then across, to some extent also from Jordan, from the Kurdish entity of northern Iraq, and also significant arms across the Lebanese border. But now, they decided that wasn't enough, and well, they might, because this was limited in numbers, and they were not able, these rebels, to take and hold any territory. Remember, the key to the Libyan tragedy was that the rebels were able to take and hold the area Tobruk, Derna, to Benghazi, and the bombing could then be predicated on the fact, well, the rebels on March 19th, and the week leading up to March 19th, 2011, Day of Infamy, they were able to say in the UN Security Council, the U.S. and the British argued, oh, if we don't intervene, then there's going to be a massacre in Benghazi. Well, up to now, these Syrian rebels, with their faction fights, their splits, their fist fights at their meetings and so forth, they have to say, we've been unable to capture any city, any village, any region of the country and hold it. They simply can't do that. They're always whining that they need more help from the outside. So NATO planners at this point say, what do we do? They want to stay below, if they did want to stay below, this may be changing, they want to stay below the threshold of a conventional attack that would be visible and incontrovertible. They want to avoid the threshold of bombing and invading, because at that point, Russia and China come into play, and very possibly some very nasty retaliation that they're afraid of. Back in a minute to continue the story. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with everything at Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net, and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. So, NATO's problem was how to destroy Syria, how to smash the Syrian state and introduce chaos and neo-feudalism, otherwise known as free market, in Syria without crossing the threshold of bombing and an invasion with infantry, large units, as was done in Libya, because now they're afraid, because what has changed is Putin is back, and with Putin, you don't mess around because he will retaliate. You don't know how, but you know that there will be a price to pay, and this could become very painful for the Anglo-Americans in all kinds of different contexts, and we could speculate about that. So, Putin is a factor of peace. Get that through your head. And don't tell me that Putin is part of the New World Order. That is absolutely ridiculous baloney and garbage, and it simply shows the lack of political analysis. So, what do you do? Well, the idea is take your existing death squad strategy and escalate that. So the word went out from NATO, above all from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, from the United Arab Emirates, from Turkey, saying, we're calling all the jihadis of the Mediterranean basin, from North Africa, from the Middle East, from Central Asia, all the way out to Pakistan, and I'm sure all the way to the gates of China. They said, come, we're going to ship you into Syria, and you are going to take part in the final overthrow of Assad. It's going to be like Operation Mermaid Dawn. Remember Operation Mermaid Dawn in August of last year, when they said Operation Siren, right, Siren, also known as. So we don't know yet what the name for this last week's operation is, but it's simply swarming. And you can go on the internet, you can see loads and loads of these patsies, these irregulars, these fanatics, these foreign fighters, these mujahideen being shipped into Syria. And you got to assume that the quality is lower, that these are not as militarily experienced, they're not as well armed, but they're also fanatics. They're mercenaries, just about all of them, fanatics, mercenaries. They are convicts, quite likely, right? These are sort of Strafbataillonen. They're convicts that are let out of jail. You know, will you go kill people in Syria? Yes. So they were told that Assad was at the point of collapse. Some of them were apparently told that they were going to fight the Israelis. I don't know how long that illusion could be kept up, but that maybe that Assad had become an ally of Israel or something like this. But the point is that these people were told it's going to be a cakewalk. You go in there, seize downtown Damascus, seize downtown Aleppo, and Assad will collapse. Now, that is what was put in place last week. Hillary Clinton, of course, signaled it in advance, her speech on July 8th. Syria has very little time to avoid a catastrophic assault leading to the smashing of the Syrian state. Smashing the state. And the idea was to do it with these swarming death squads. Now, connected to that was the notion of television warfare, and we've talked about that. Video fakery, it's one of our favorite themes here, has been since June 11th or so, when Maison, once again, put out an analysis about the Ben Rhodes plan, take over Arabsat, take over Nilesat, kick off Syrian state television, kick off Al Dunya, kick off Sham television, and put on fake programming from the CIA, MI6, Saudi intelligence, and the rest of them. Some of it generated on special sound stages and movie sets in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, show the flight of Assad, show the surrender of the generals, have all kinds of fakery, let your imagination run wild. Now, that was implemented this past week. We have any number of reports from Maison, from the Russian Strategic Culture Foundation, Dolgov, I think his name is, writing there, saying, look, at certain points, the Arabsat and Nilesat were cut off, and Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, Al Jazeera of Qatar, Al Arabiya of Saudi Arabia, put out the story that Assad was fleeing, and it was false. So they had all this, but it was well known. See, to inoculate in advance, to inoculate and vaccinate the populations, we are told by Maison now that the Syrian state television, Dunya and others, were putting on for days, maybe weeks, public service announcements saying, we are told that NATO or other forces are going to interfere with our signal and our broadcasting. Our program is going to be preempted, and they're going to put on a fake version. And they said, if you want to avoid Arabsat and Nilesat, go to Atlantic Bird. Apparently there's another satellite where you could get it. Now, obviously the Anglo-Americans will go after that one too. But you get the idea. There was enough inoculation so that the psychological impact of the video fakery and Ben Rhodes' television media warfare, media brainwashing, was blunted. It did not create the panic that it did, for example, in Libya, when the fake movie set in Qatar showed the rebels entering the Green Square probably 24 hours or so before they actually did so. Now, the preparations involved, as we learned from the Wall Street Journal this week, the preparation for the attack also involved trying to isolate Syria from international communications. Wall Street Journal, July 23rd, United States government was exerting pressure on the government of Iraq, on Maliki, saying to Maliki, you must deny overflight permission for flights between Syria and Iran. Don't let them go through Iraqi airspace. there was even an official U.S. diplomatic démarche delivered in Baghdad saying, you must stop flights between Iran and Syria, between Tehran and Damascus. We want them banned. And at the same time, they went to Egypt and they said, you must now violate the international treaty on the status of the Suez Canal, which makes it open to everybody, and this is to avoid world wars that might otherwise occur. You've got to block Iranian ships from going through the Suez Canal because they might be headed to Syrian ports and they might have weapons for Assad. Of course, the Saudi vessels, Qatar vessels, other vessels, United Arab Emirates, loaded with weapons, they can go through, but not if you're for Assad. Again, similar to the Spanish Civil War and the hypocrisy and the double standard. Now, it looks like the stuff with Iraq may have worked on some flights. Concerning Egypt, it's not clear how well it worked. Let's tell Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood there in Syria, boys, we are watching you, and we want to see if you block the Iranian ships going through the Suez Canal, we will take note, and we will know better who we're dealing with, Morsi. And if you, of course, the IMF issue is the dominant one, but here's an issue. And let me also say, I've had people telling me that the Palestinians are an infallible guide to Middle East affairs. Well, they are not. And that guy, Haniya of Hamas, has turned against Assad months ago. Maybe he's on the Saudi payroll, right? Maybe that's what's wrong with the Muslim Brotherhood in general. They're getting all the money from the Saudis. And as the German proverb says, if I eat your bread, I'll sing your song. So, not so good. Now, the UN Security Council resolution, thank God for Russia, as Navy Secretary Gideon Wells said in 1863. There was a double veto of that resolution. Pakistan and South Africa, despite severe U.S. arm twisting, voted no. They voted to abstain. Sorry. Russia and China said no. Pakistan and South Africa abstained. This is not looking good. Now, at this point, the Viper, Susan Rice, became hysterical, and we'll tell you about her antics when we come back here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, keeping up with Syria. So, when the resolution failed, now this is the third time that Ambassador Rice, the bubbling cauldron of hate, the Viper, the vampire, actually she has now eclipsed her namesake, Condi Rice, Susan Rice became hysterical, and she lashed out. She said, the Russian Federation in particular, pitiful, dangerous, deplorable. Now, of course, this is the official U.S. line. Hillary Clinton had already said Russia is despicable and intolerable. And we have to think back. You look at William L. Shirer, at certain key moments of tension in the Munich crisis of September 1938, we had this report that Hitler was chewing the carpet. And I can imagine that the carpets at the home of Susan Rice and Hillary Clinton are showing telltale tooth marks. And one thing you might want to do with these ladies was thought of with other government officials. They might start receiving pieces of carpet with a dotted line and the suggestion, chew along dotted line on the carpet. This is from an old Bugs Bunny cartoon. Now, most interesting, the attitude of Russia. And this is now Foreign Minister Lavrov. This is a turning point, I think, in the entire crisis, which is the response by Lavrov to what the U.S. has been saying and doing. This is a Reuters wire from Moscow, Wednesday, July 25th. So Lavrov is meeting the foreign minister of Cyprus. Okay. He says, Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister of the Russian Federation, is asking, what do you think of the U.S. attitude? The U.S. attitude towards these bombings in Syria, right? The bombing of a government building and the killing of 3 and ultimately 4 top government officials, some others severely wounded. It's terrorism. Except, no. These are wonderful fighters for democracy, says Susan Rice. Now, Lavrov commented saying, this is a direct justification of terrorism. Now, he's talking about Newland. He might also be talking about Rice. Now, we can also wonder, we've had a big brouhaha this week about Huma Abedin. Huma Abedin is Hillary Clinton's body person. You've seen her. I mean, I've seen her at public appearances by Hillary. There's Huma Abedin is always hovering, like, do you need a glass of water? Do you need anything? And the accusation is that Huma Abedin has connections to the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, I would start somewhere else. I would start with Susan Rice. I would start with Victoria Nuland and say, wait a minute, you are supporting the Syrian rebels, right? And the Syrian rebels are shot through with Al-Qaeda, Salafis, and other killers. Are you ladies not providing material support to terrorism? I think that would make a whole lot more sense than harassing Huma Abedin, whatever she represents, which I admittedly do not know. But without commenting on Huma, let's focus on the ones that we can identify. So we now have the interesting situation that the foreign minister of Russia accuses the spokeslady of the State Department of direct justification for terrorism. To put it mildly, we don't understand the refusal of our partners to condemn the terrorist attack in Damascus. The U.S. is flirting with terrorism. There's no condemnation of a bloody, murderous bombing attack on the Syrian government buildings. And then he gets to Susan Rice. He says Susan Rice essentially said that the bombing in Damascus was yet another reason to adopt a resolution with Chapter 7 measures against Syria. Economic sanctions that would be binding on everybody in the world, and an attack, a no-fly zone military action. Lavrov then says, in other words, the U.S. position means, quote, we will continue to support such terrorist attacks until the Security Council does what we want, Lavrov told a news conference with the Cypriot foreign minister. This is a terrible position. Now, we know the problem of the Russian elite, right? The problem of the nomenclatura is that they've been torn between maintaining Russian state security and integrating themselves into the globalized ruling class of the world. There are people there who want to join what some people would call the New World Order, but now they're seeing you can't do it. It is an unbridgeable gap. You cannot maintain Russia as a viable nation state and at the same time integrate yourself into the same world with Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, Victoria Nuland, Fabius, Haig, Cameron, and all the rest of them. So there it is. Now, that has led to a noticeable hardening of the Russian line. You can see it on Russia Today. Things have gotten somewhat better, although the pro-Assange stuff is continuous, and it's repulsive, to be sure, because Assange is somebody who wants the attack on Syria, right? Let's make that part clear. And Ecuador is very right to hold off, at least on taking him. So the idea was then the following components would come together. The United Nations resolution would lead either to bombing within hours or to a collapse of the Syrian morale. The TV fakery would show the flight of Assad, and it did. They tried to make you believe that he had fled. And then we had the decapitation or assassinations. Now, the decapitation assassinations managed to kill the defense minister Raja, the top Christian in the regime. They killed Shaukat, an intelligence official who was also Assad's brother-in-law, and they had another victim in the form of Turkmani, the crisis management focal point man, and then later Ikhtiar, the another intelligence official, died of his wounds. Now they say that some accounts say that the foreign minister Moalem was wounded. Certainly the interior minister was wounded. Now what was this? As Mason and others point out, this is an attempted decapitation. This is an attempt to lop off the head of the Syrian state and to introduce chaos and confusion. It is not regime change, not simply that. It is to destroy the state in the way that the U.S. proceeded to destroy the Iraqi state after occupying the country. This is an attempt to do it using these irregulars. Now, the crazies that were brought in come from many countries. They come from Libya. They come from Saudi Arabia. We can say that they come from Egypt, Jordan, Somalia, Sudan, Iraq, many other countries. As they came in, they seized control of several border crossings. That was very much hyped here about a week ago. And it's assumed that the terror wave in Iraq is a byproduct of the fact if you bring a lot of these crazies into Iraq, some of them will go to Syria as they're supposed to, but some of them will then branch off. And, of course, it's a way to interrupt the communications, right? What if Iran decides to send a truck convoy across Iraq into Syria? Well, you've got to have plenty of terrorist crazies there so that they can attack them. There had been hopes in NATO circles that the 4th Armored Division would mutiny, the Republican Guard. They did not. A couple of other things. There's also an attempt to create a panic run on the Syrian currency. This would be economic and financial chaos to make the picture complete. So you get the idea. Cut the links to Iran by pressuring Iraq and Egypt. Go to the United Nations and hopefully break the Sino-Russian coalition. Go with the TV fakery. Go with the assassination. The assassination, one other thing, nobody can guarantee that was a suicide bomber who brought that into the building. That could have been a drone, a U.S. drone firing a missile. According to Maison, the explosion was detonated from the U.S. Embassy, which is a few hundred yards away. The attack on the currency, the swarming of the foreign fighters, the byproduct in Iraq, you get the idea. And nevertheless, the Syrian state has held firm, and that is a big victory in itself. Not the end, but at least an optimistic sign. We'll be back in a minute with the second half of this week's World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with everything at Tarpley.net and at Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. We're sending out some tweets this week about a couple of new publications on Syria that people might want to take a look at, and maybe we'll get to those again next week. Let's try to wrap up on Syria. Remember that Victoria Nuland is the wife of the neocon Kagan, who was an advisor to Mitt Romney. Now, the big news today is we're told Nuland's latest sortie is there's supposed to be a massacre in Aleppo. Well, Corriere della Sera, and you found this on my Twitter feed, Corriere della Sera of Milan, their correspondent already yesterday being the 26th of July, says the rebels have all fled. The rebels have fled Aleppo. They're fleeing towards Turkey, and they're not going to put up a big resistance. The idea, of course, is that when this perfect storm with swarming terrorists and all the other components that I've just gone through, when that failed, these killers were left in exposed positions in the middle of Damascus, in the middle of Aleppo and other cities, and they are sitting ducks. They can't defend those positions. It's a little bit like the Tet Offensive, although this gets complicated. The Tet Offensive did not work militarily. It did work politically because of the U.S. Television networks, and is probably better so. But the idea was that when the Viet Cong took control of downtown Saigon, they couldn't hold it. And that was the end of the Viet Cong, right? They basically they passed from the page of history in 1968-69 because they're basically all liquidated as a result of trying to hold these places. Now, that may well happen. Maison says between 40 and 60,000 of these swarming terrorists were brought in. I think that may be on the high side, but it may be true. Certainly many thousands, and it looks like a lot of them are being annihilated in these pockets inside these cities. Now, it looks like some of them have tried to flee Aleppo, as many as they can, to flee Aleppo in order to get out of that. So I think if the big story of the coming week is the Aleppo massacre, that's probably going to be a complete fraud. Now, Erdogan of Turkey has taken leave of his senses once again. He invokes the doctrine of hot pursuit. Hot pursuit says, if those Syrian Kurds strike across into Turkey, or if PKK units, maybe based in Syria, strike into Turkey, we can do hot pursuit when they go back into Syria. Yeah, Erdogan, remember that the big principle of international relations is reciprocity. You do it to them, they do it to you. The Syrian government at that point could say, those FSA terrorists that were based in southern Turkey struck into Syria, then they fled back. We're doing hot pursuit, so don't complain. And Erdogan also says that he's going to hit the Kurds, the PKK, in Syria. Well, again, that leads to war. What are you getting out of this, Erdogan? What is the point of this, right? As they say, it's attributed to Euripides. Maybe it's not Euripides, but whom the gods would destroy, they first drive mad. And mad, of course, is this statement from Erdogan. Now, Reuters today admits that there's a secret base inside Turkey. The place is called Adna, A-D-N-A. And here we're told that Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, the U.S. keeping at arm's length, I don't believe it, but we're told that Saudi Prince Abdulaziz, the deputy foreign minister of the Saudi reactionary feudal monarchy, Prince Abdulaziz, came to Turkey and he said, I want a base here for logistical backup of the death squads inside Syria. Now here's the thing. Adna is the location of the Incirlik NATO air base. NATO, get it? Dominated by the United States. The article actually says it's not clear whether the Adna Logistics Center is located inside the Incirlik base or slightly outside, but you get the idea. It is a three-country operation sponsored by the United States, and we're told the United States so far will not allow SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, handheld missiles, the kind that were so effective against the Soviets in Afghanistan. They don't want to give those to the rebels because they know that the rebels are Al-Qaeda, and eventually they're going to be used against the West or others. Now, here's the other thing. As you go on with this stuff, the Turks claim that they have sealed their borders. Now, when I heard the Turks have sealed their borders, that says, well, are they cutting off aid to the death squad? No! The Washington Post yesterday reassures us. Their NATO stenographer, Liz Sly says, and it's a detailed article, Turkey is maintaining lots and lots of illegal but tolerated, they're sort of semi-official, formally speaking, illegal crossings. In other words, when the Free Syrian Army needs to go on R&R in Turkey, they can do it. They don't have to go through the official legal border crossings. They can just go across these illegal ones, and at most there's a Turkish officer sitting there writing the names of who goes through, who comes and who goes. Now, the more you push this, the more NATO harps on democracy, beats the drum for regime change in Syria, the more this may kick over into Saudi Arabia, this monstrous reactionary feudal monarchy, absolute monarchy, and more, the oppression of women, the denial of human rights, no free speech. You know the drill. Now, here are the two elements. Prince Bandar bin Sultan of Saudi Arabia, right? This is Bandar Bush, who has had some interesting ideas in the past, but I guess he like Erdogan they've decided to go in the wrong direction over the last few years. Bandar was just made the official head of Saudi intelligence. And on Sunday, July 22nd, this past Sunday, 4 days after the attack in Damascus on the government building that killed the 3+1 so far, a very similar building in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was attacked in a very similar way. An explosion went off at the official headquarters of Saudi intelligence, and it killed not Bandar, but Bandar's deputy. You can find this written up on Press TV. There was an assassination attempt. I would say it's an assassination attempt on Prince Bandar that missed Bandar but got his deputy on Sunday, the 22nd of July, just a few days after the very similar attack in Damascus. Now, is that payback? Is that somebody's retaliation? Could well be. It's also just destiny, right? Remember Philippe Égalité, the member of the French royal family who supported the revolution? Actually, he's the guy who got the attack on the Bastille going. We just had the anniversary of that. Philippe Égalité, who thought he could ride the tiger of revolution, but eventually lost his head on the guillotine. The Saudi royal family may find themselves collectively in the situation of Philippe Égalité. But now we have more news. There's been a constant process of protests and maybe riots in Saudi Arabia over the past weeks and months. And now we've reached another high point of this. If we go to Russia Today and Press TV, we are told that the Saudi police have opened fire on a demonstration in the city of Qatif, Qatif. We are in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, the Shiite area of Saudi Arabia. And sure enough, the cause of the protest is that the Saudi authorities have arrested the Shiite cleric Nemr, M-E-M-R. Now here we have a high-handed outrage. We don't know how many killed or wounded, but it's in Saudi Arabia. Don't hold your breath for the controlled NATO media to tell you about this one. So the idea is perhaps that bomb at that government building that slew the deputy to Bandar, maybe that is the signal for something bigger coming in Saudi Arabia. And ultimately, that might be a way to shut down the attack on Syria. If Saudi Arabia boils over into revolution, that will cut off at the knees the coalition attacking Syria. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley, Washington, D.C., Tarpley.net, and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed are the places to go. Syria occupying a lot of the program today, inevitably. Couple of other things. Davutoglu of Turkey also taking leave of his senses. Cavorts in public with Manaf Tlas, Brigadier General Manaf Tlas of Syria. This obviously the new NATO golden boy, right, to be the strong man of post-Assad Turkey. I guess there are many strictures one could have against Manaf Tlas. One is that he's the son of a cannibal. He is the son of Mustafa Tlas. Mustafa Tlas was somebody who was up to his neck in all kinds of dirty things under the regime of Assad the Elder, which was a different proposition in different times. Right, the son actually, Bashar, is a reformer, especially compared to Hafez Assad. But Mustafa Tlas is a case on his own. In other words, Mustafa Tlas was not an administrative extension even of Hafez Assad, and he is on record at one point recommending cannibalism as a military tactic, that you can kill enemies and then eat them, says Mustafa Tlas, the elder. So this is now the hero of democracy. The son of the cannibal is now the hero of democracy. It's also interesting, Mustafa Tlas seems to be the only member of the Syrian inner circle who then intermarried with the existing colonial elite, Ottoman to colonial, French colonial elite. Davutoglu cavorting in public with General Tlas. Well, if that's democracy, I'll eat my hat. King Abdullah brought up the chemical weapons, playing the NATO propaganda game. Notice that there has been an end of restraint. One of the things that people complained to me about in Homs last November, average Syrians said, look, we don't understand why the government doesn't do more. We want more army, more tanks to get those snipers off the roofs. Well, the restraint has now ended, right? Use your helicopters, use your MiGs, go ahead and defend yourself. You got to put an end to the violence, right? When there's a rebellion, as General Sherman says, the only thing to do with a rebellion is to quell it. Grant, Sherman, Sheridan, Thomas would all agree. Don't show restraint. Restraint was McClellan. It doesn't work. We've got NATO drills going on. That's the other thing that makes this so dangerous. What has deterred the West is fear of Putin in general and fear of the Syrian SAMs, the Syrian air defenses specifically. Now we have 3 NATO drills going on or just completed. We have Operation Sea Breeze by NATO, 17 NATO countries, plus Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Turkey. That was from the 9th to the 21st of July in the Black Sea. Ended 4 days ago. Then we have Operation Rapid Trident. 16 countries. This is in Ukraine. This is Partnership for Peace. Ukraine, not a member of NATO, but U.S., Ukraine, other countries, essentially in a very, very hot corner, right? Ukraine, Belarus, the 2 hottest places on Earth under certain circumstances. That's from the 16th to the 18th of July, still ongoing. And then we have Dacian Thunder, Dacia, Roman name for Romania. So Dacian Thunder, U.S., Britain, Romania, the 81st Fighter Squadron from the United States, the 10th to the 31st of July in Romania. So big emphasis on the Black Sea. Getting between Russia and Syria seems to be the idea. Dangerous, not good. So, finally, one last thing. Concerning the Goebbels Prize and the Ribbentrop Prize, the Ribbentrop Prize, of course, is for diplomats of aggressor countries that have shown the greatest degree of hypocrisy, cynical hypocrisy in defending the imperialist line. The Goebbels Prize is for prostitutes, right? It's for media whores who have shown the greatest elan or aplomb in lying. So these are slightly different categories. Ribbentrop for the diplomats and government officials, the Goebbels Prize for the media. Now, remember, these can be awarded almost any time. They can be awarded daily. They can be awarded hourly. And because of my deep commitment to democracy, I want people to know that the Ribbentrop Prize and the Goebbels Prize are in the hands of the people, not monopolized by me by any stretch of the imagination. I'll continue to propose prize winners day by day, and I hope that others will join in. This would be a great theme on the Internet. Remind people of who Ribbentrop and Goebbels were and the obvious connections between them and the current situation. Now, let me just see if we can... we want to get to Romney because of Romney's antics, but the food stamp bill. This is the Farm Bill, United States Department of Agriculture Farm Bill, the 5-year bill. And right now, we have the Farm Bill. According to some accounts, there won't be a Farm Bill. That it's simply the climate is too polarized to have a Farm Bill. They may just go ahead with a continuing resolution. But here it is. The fascists of the Republican Party, obviously with Ron Paul as the point man, because he has proposed bigger cuts in food stamps, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Ron Paul has gone farther than anybody in proposing genocide against the American people by cutting food stamps. So the idea is the House of Representatives, Congressman Boehner and his ag chairman, they propose to cut the food stamp program by $17 billion over the next 5 years. The Senate, not as bad, but very bad, they want to cut $5 billion or so out of it. The House Farm Bill would also reduce benefits for the people that remain in the program. Well, remember, I would recommend that they take the Mario Batali Challenge. Chef Mario Batali on ABC News. This is a program called The Chew on ABC. Mario Batali's Food Stamp Challenge. Walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. You go on food stamps for a week and see if it ought to be cut. Right now, you have to feed your family on $31 per person per week. $1 per 48 per meal. Remember, with Ron Paul's cuts, it would go down to between 50 and 60 cents per meal. So forget about fresh fruit, forget about organic vegetables. You're going to get eggs, starches, beans, tacos, lentils, rice. Some of these can be okay, but you can't build exclusively on them. There's a question of categorical eligibility. There's a question of how many cars can you own. Do you have to give up your cars? If you're getting food stamps, you need as many cars as there are adults in the family, because they got to look for work and then they got to go to work. And we don't have public transportation. So what is this garbage? A couple of more things on food stamps in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. A few more things about food stamps. No cuts in food stamps. Very simple. No cuts. Food stamps have got to be increased. The food stamp allowance is too small. Go with Mario Batali, $31 per person per week, $1.48 a meal. That is no good. That's not good nutrition. We have to protect our labor force. That's all we have. We have a labor force that has taken some nasty knocks. We don't need to compound it. There are 50 million people who need food stamps to stay alive. They have no job, no welfare, no unemployment benefits, no health care. They've been stripped of everything, and now these fascists want to strip them of part of their food stamps. And Ron Paul, of course, out there leading the charge in the attack on poor people. Cut the Defense Department by 15%, said Ron Paul, but cut food stamps by 63%. That's disgraceful. Anybody who ever supported Ron Paul, hide your head in shame when you read what he proposed in that Restore America. Now, admittedly, a lot of people haven't looked at it, but you should. Nuremberg says you knew or should have known. So right now it's 46 million to be precise. It's the 50 million in effect. Pre-Depression in 2007-2008, it was 23 million food stamp recipients. Under Bush, it went up linearly, and of the 46 million we have right now, about half of them came on or stayed on under Bush. So this is a co-production. The Republicans say it's a scandal that 46 million people are getting food stamp payments. No, it's not. The scandal is that they're destitute and they need it. And it means that the job creators have struck out. Where are the job creators? Where are the people who are supposed to deliver the jobs? They're hoarding their money overseas, in the Cayman Islands, in Bermuda, in Luxembourg, in Germany, and in other places, right? We see this with Mitt Romney. So Mississippi and Oregon have the most, 21%. Very, very interesting. So we're not interested in balancing the budget on the backs of the poor. And remember that cuts will never balance a budget. You cannot balance a budget using cuts. This is what Samaras is finding in Greece, what the Troika found in Greece this week, with Barroso also going in there. So you can choose food stamps or food riots. Let's choose food stamps and avoid the food riots. But there are obviously Republicans who'd rather have the food riots. Now, we've also got to remember that the Romney background, right? Bishop Romney's tradition, if you will, is that of Mormonism, which is a religion which has had powerful elements of racism built into it. How interesting that Romney proposes to get elected president thanks to massive voter suppression in many states. Now, the voter suppression was coordinated by Koch, the Koch brothers. ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, put out model legislation how to use this alleged specter, the boogeyman of vote fraud, which is almost never the case, almost never found, and use that to kick millions and millions of people off the voting rolls and deliver the election to Romney. Now, Harold Meyerson, the resident liberal at the Washington Post this week, says, if you get Romney winning the election with a smaller margin than the number of people thrown off the voting rolls by these oppressive, reactionary, Republican, racist laws sponsored by the Koch brothers, then that will make Romney illegitimate in the deepest sense of American history. And at that point, a real opposition would essentially say, we won't deal with you. We will not allow the confirmation of any of your appointees by the Senate. We will go into a full parliamentary obstructionist filibustering mode on everything that you want. We will essentially shut it all down. Now, of course, you can hold your breath waiting for the Democratic Party to do that. They wouldn't do it. But that might be the point when they don't do it. That might be the point where the Democratic Party might split. If Romney wins the election based on voter suppression, and then the Democrats try to go to business as usual, that might be the moment when you'd have a revulsion against both of those parties that would create something, again, not in this mythical middle, which does not exist, but off to the left of the Democratic Party. Now let's look at Romney. Romney on display, innocence abroad, or the guilty abroad. And, of course, the question of Mormonism always there. Now, this week, it's funny, of course, that Romney was able to insult the British. The London Sun calls him Mitt the Twit, Daily Mail. Who invited him? And other newspapers similarly, right? The Daily Telegraph, NATO intelligence, says he went on a charm offensive, but he had no charm, and he was offensive, or that thereabouts. Now, notice the pattern is the denigration of the host. Where might that come from? One of the important things that I think you have to bear in mind is that religious traditions, especially in religions with a strong, cohesive force, Protestant sects in particular, they affect the mentality of individuals. The denigration of the host. We saw this with Romney when he sat down with some Pennsylvania voters and he managed to criticize the cookies that were being served, saying they must have come from that downtown proletarian plebeian local 7-Eleven, and he was not so sure about them. And in this case, he's managed to insult the British and the English. Where might that come from in the tradition? Well, simply Mormonism. What were Mormons? Mormons were created inside the United States, but they were secessionists from the word go. They hated the United States. You look at Brigham Young, he talks about those damned Americans, the Gentiles, right? The Mormons were an island of saints in the middle of a bunch of corrupt Gentiles. So this notion of denigrating your host, biting the hand that feeds you, in effect, being a secessionist, being treasonous, this is deeply ingrained. This is what Joseph Smith and then Brigham Young and quite a few others were able to manage. By the way, in terms of what Romney blurted out, he met the head of MI6. What the hell is Romney doing meeting the head of MI6? What does that have to do with anything? And then he said so. I remember at the Bilderberg, we had a lot of the libertarian cohorts were there saying, the Bilderberg members violate the Logan Act. I think this is much clearer. Hey, guys who were so upset about the Bilderberg and the Logan Act, here's Romney. He's a Bilderberger. Here's Romney, who is literally meeting the entire British government, including the head of MI6. That's not a political post. That's not just, glad-handing, meeting and greeting. Did Romney violate the Logan Act? We also know that Romney is guilty of perjury. He swore to the Securities and Exchange Commission that he was at Bain Capital from 1999 to 2002. According to the SEC filings, he was on the job. He told the Federal Elections Commission the opposite, that after 1999 he was not there. One or the other is perjury. Arrest him, indict him. Now remember that Romney's job at the Salt Lake City Olympics was to cover up for the Mormon saints who had committed massive crimes. They had bribed the International Olympic Committee. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act comes into play. Therefore, his job was to do the cover-up, and in the process, he has, of course, acquired blackmail material on so many of the leading saints. These are the saints, the Latter-day Saints. Of course, with Romney, he doesn't get 200,000 lemmings drooling acolytes at the Brandenburg Gate the way Obama did. He gets 60,000 Londoners jeering at him, guided by Boris Johnson, the mayor of London. But we're going to talk in a minute again about Romney's tradition and how you can see it reflected in his dubious actions. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We should have mentioned, of course, that Food stamps are a New Deal program, I believe about 1940. And therefore any attack on them, that's another attack on the economic rights of the American people as finally validated in the New Deal. So Romney and his tradition, Ann Romney, the horsewoman, the woman who has to be content with a couple of Cadillacs, the working mother who's got 25 to 30 servants in the house at any given time, but she's really committed in terms of running that household. She's going to have a dancing horse in the Olympics. That is dressage, an international consortium. She's an investor. Remember, the dressage horse costs at least $100,000. The stabling and care, tens of thousands of dollars per year. Shipping the horse to London, you can, guess how much that's going to be. There it is. She's going to be competing in the Olympics, and you notice Romney is running away from that because he's a plutocrat. He's a parasite, and he's a plutocrat. But now, the connection with Mormonism again. Romney always says, "I love my faith." He's devoted to Mormonism. The whole apparatus, from the Marriotts to the Huntsmans, these are the Mormon plutocrats, the inner circle, even higher than the official bureaucrats in Salt Lake City, are these fabulously wealthy families, the ones who make up the compound, some of them here in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C. Romney, therefore, has been in the inner circle of Mormondom for 6 to 7 generations, according to some estimates. If he picks Rubio, remember that Senator Rubio, known as the senator from Gusanos, Rubio was himself a Mormon for 10 years. And then when did he stop being a Mormon? Was that political expediency that 2 Mormons would be one too many or something like that? Anyway, is Rubio a crypto-Mormon, I guess is the question. But Rubio certainly exposed to Mormonism for a good long time in his formative years. And then we've got Mike Leavitt, Governor Mike Leavitt, who's running the transition team, and we'll have more to say about him during the coming week. We know that the foreign policy will be run by neocons. That's a given. You've got Kagan, Dan Sr., Bolton, Robert Joseph, the one who put the Niger yellow cake into the Bush State of the Union address, Elliot Cohen. It's a somewhat different cohort of neocons, but neocons they are. Can we detect these elements of the tradition in what Romney does? The first element that I would stress is antinomianism. Antinomianism, or the antinomian heresy, as the Catholics might call it, is the idea that the law is suspended. The moral law and the ethical law of the religion is not operative anymore. It's suspended. And here we should, if you want to start somewhere with this, we have Fawn Brody, an interesting person, now deceased. Fawn Brody was the wife of Bernard Brody, who was a strangelove, but that doesn't seem to be the main thing in her life. She's interested. She's a former Mormon, so she wants to write the life of Joseph Smith. No man knows my history, writes Fawn Brody. And she says that the main element in the parents of Joseph Smith, the prophet that started the Mormon religion, is antinomianism. And that it comes from, it's an abreaction against the Great Awakening in the United States in the 1740s, 1750s, 1760s. The Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God, right? The doctrinaire Calvinism, right? Absolute depravity, total predestination, very, very, ugly doctrine, to put it bluntly. According to Fawn Brody, the parents of Joseph Smith, Joseph Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith, were both from heterodox families in their own right, and they were fleeing from Jonathan Edwards. So Jonathan Edwards, of course, evil, but bringing it down then to an abreaction against that might also be disoriented. Lucy Mack Smith says the problem with all the Protestant denominations and sects is if you join one, all the rest are against you. The only one that will say that you're right is the one that you've joined. So they become witnesses against each other. Now, Fawn Brodie comments about this. This was the universal logic of dissent, a conviction shared by thousands of New Englanders in this period. It comes from Vermont. Lucy Mack Smith had a vigorous, though unschooled mind, and her belief was simply the core of antinomianism, that the inner life is a law unto itself. Freedom, integrity of religious experience must be preserved at all costs. Now, this can get very dangerous very fast. Couple of other examples. Among the Protestant sects, Quakerism is notable for the antinomian element. And under Quakerism, if the inner voice tells you that something is not a sin, you can suspend the moral law and you can go ahead and do it because the inner voice has told you, right? It's extra scriptural revelation. God has told you it's okay, go ahead and do it. In Judaism, back in 1666, we had the phenomenon of Shabtai Zvi, or Sabbatai Zevi, with the same idea that the second coming was at hand. The Messiah was Shabtai Zevi. Once the Messiah returns, the law is suspended. You can do what you want. Now, in the case of the Quakers, think of Nixon. Think of Nixon, who was a Quaker, violating all those laws, right? Running wild in the White House. He obviously had the idea that some force, some factor, had suspended the laws, in the terms of the laws of the United States, and the moral law for him. Do we have the same thing with Romney? I think when we look at Bain Capital, when we look at all those lives and jobs and factories destroyed, and when we look at things like telling the FEC one thing and the SEC another thing, and many other cases that we could adduce, it seems to me that we have this nucleus, this core of antinomianism. Now let's look at some other cases. When he's dodging the question of Bain Capital from 99 to 02, Romney says, or Romney's spokesperson says, he retroactively retired. How can you do anything retroactively, right? In legal terminology, it's nunc pro tunc, right? I'm doing this now, but I'm projecting it back into the past. Well, that may work or it may not with nunc pro tunc. But retroactive retirement looks to me like the practice that the Mormons have of baptizing people who are dead and gone. Under Christianity, in most cases, you have to get baptized in your lifetime or it's not going to help. Once you are gone, you're gone, and baptism is no longer an available option. But in Mormonism, you can baptize anybody. You can retroactively Mormonize them. You can project them into the Mormon polytheistic paradise ex post facto. All right. Couple of other examples. Romney as a flip-flopper. Romney's always flip-flopping, right? He changes his position on everything. Gay marriage, gun control, you name it, right? Doesn't matter. Everything. He's professed everything and the opposite of everything at least once in his career. Now, let's look at Mormonism. Let's take the big issue, of course, polygamy, right? No discussion can be complete without polygamy. So what's the story on polygamy? In the Book of Mormon, polygamy is explicitly not allowed. The Book of Mormon says you take one wife. By the time, though, and that's in upstate New York, 1826, 1827, 1830, the Book of Mormon, right, from the gold plates with the angel Moroni. But then by the time Joseph Smith is in Nauvoo, Illinois, in the last days, in the early 1830s, he says yes to polygamy. And by the time we get into 1895, when they finally want to become a state, no to polygamy. How about discrimination against blacks? In the Book of Mormon, it's okay. They're no good. Those are the Lamanites. By the time we get to Joseph Smith running for president in the 1830s, that part is downplayed, right? The anti-black stuff, and it's returned by Brigham Young that black people are bad, and that's not lifted until 1878. Church and state, right? In Joseph Smith, and in Brigham Young, it's clear it's a theocracy, but by the 1890s they have to say separation of church and state. So you're getting constant shifts, constant flip-flopping in the religious tradition. Is that then reflected in the flip-flops of Romney? See you next